I'm Ben Weingarten.
I'm Will Chamberlain.
I'm Amber Duke.
I'm Inez Stepman.
And this is NatCon Squad, where common good and common sense meet. NatCon Squad is produced by the Edmund Burke Foundation, the home for national conservatism. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And just a reminder at the outset, NatCon 5 will be held in Washington, D.C., September 2 to the 4th. Sign up at nationalconservatism.org and don't miss the conservative event of the year. Very much looking forward to it. As always, we'll jump right in with a bevy of topics to cover this week. Will kick us off talking about the U.S.-EU trade deal recently consummated. Inez will discuss the EPA's reversal on some of the green climate change policies, which could have a substantial impact on energy. I'll talk a little bit about the coming battle royale over redistricting with respect to the battle for control over the House. And then Amber will take us home by talking about the fake Sydney Sweeney controversy. But with that, let's open it up with Will.
Yeah, so I think something, honestly, it's surprising this got so little play. Went out of the news cycle in 24 hours, but it's a massive, massive achievement for the Trump administration. They've recently, while President Trump was in Scotland over the last week, he consummated a trade agreement with the entire European Union that is remarkably favorable to the United States. It's a trade agreement that basically says that the United States will be able to sell into the European Union tariff-free, and the European Union will sell into the United States at a 15% tariff. This is a complete reversal of previous policy, where before it was we had very, very modest tariffs on EU goods coming in here, but they had very substantial tariffs on our goods coming in there. It was very unfavorable to American workers and American manufacturing, and generally a big contributor to a massive trade deficit and the hollowing out of our industrial base. That's flipped on its head. Trump managed to accomplish this in a matter of months. And, I remember again thinking at the beginning of all the tariff stuff when he was threatening really, really aggressive tariffs, well, this is dangerous. I hope it works out. It seems to have worked out very, very well. Trump has a really keen understanding of our leverage and has negotiated something very impressive. So just to kind of go through some of the details, the 15% tariff on EU goods into the United States includes things that the EU would rather not, things like cars. So, Porsche, Mercedes-Benz are going to come in on a 15% tariff. Pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, machinery, and electronics. There's an exemption for things like aircraft parts, and a few other products, but in general, most things are going to be subject to a 15% tariff. The EU has also agreed to buy $750 billion in American energy products over the next 3 years, which is a massive increase, which will reduce their dependence on Russian natural gas if they actually go ahead and do that. And further committed to $600 billion in new investments in the United States. So, I mean, a huge use of American leverage. And the reason we have so much leverage is because we are the dominant consumer market for goods all over the world. We're the wealthiest country in the world. And so we are therefore in the catbird seat when it comes to these trade negotiations. Trump knows it and he's exploiting it to the fullest. It's just going to be really good for our country. It's going to be really good for our workers. I can't, I don't really see the downsides of things completely inverting. The only real possible downside here is increased cost to consumers, but of various products coming from Europe, but ultimately that just encourages more domestic production of a lot of things that we really should be producing anyway. So I don't know what you guys think, but I think this is not good enough play. It's a massive and durable victory, I think, for the United States, and yet another, remarkable turn of affairs, comparable, I think, to, flipping the Biden administration's massive open border into a border that is completely secured.
Yeah, I agree that this is not getting enough media attention at all. This is a huge deal. It's also a week after there was another massive trade deal secured with Japan, where Japan has committed to purchasing $8 billion worth of American goods and investing pretty significantly in American manufacturing. There was a lot of panic-in behavior when the tariffs were first announced, and it was pretty clear based on Trump's public statements, the statements of Howard Lutnick, that this was a negotiating tool in order to get other countries to lower their tariffs on American exports and just overall open up better trading conditions around the board. So far, based on the deals that have been announced and the ones that are still in the works, that plan is going exceptionally well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that this has not gotten the coverage that it deserves. And once again, with the growth numbers coming out at 3% for the quarter, it really shows it shows that a lot of the panic and predictions were not true. It shows that a lot of the quote unquote experts, once again, were incorrect about the impact on the economy. That's not to say that, we're only at the beginning of this big shift that President Trump is trying to effectuate, really changing the basis, not just of manufacturing in America, but change the basis of the American economy and change our posture towards our allies and our adversaries in the economic, the global economy. And I said back in the, weeks and weeks ago, it feels like a lifetime ago when he started this process, that we really need to give some time for this to evaluate it, to see if it works. I still think that, we need to give it more time. This is not it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we'll see if some of these like longer term worrying indicators for America, including our ability to manufacture key things here domestically, if those improve over time. But this is a really good sign. And what it is a total rebuke, I think, to people who just completely panicked, said there's going to be a global financial depression, right? Do we remember that? I know we've all moved on from that, but there was a lot of that on, even on the Republican side. And I think it should behoove all of us to panic a little less when some of these things are being discussed. Just one example of the shift in mentality, Axios had a very funny headline about these trades, which boiled down to, I'm paraphrasing here, good deal for the US, bad for everyone else. And of course, that whole article was framed as a criticism, as though it's somehow controversial or, evil for the United States president to cut a deal that is good for the United States, in fact, better for the United States than it is for the rest of the world. Just I thought, a very revealing way of talking about these things. Of course, the big challenge that Trump will face in this arena is coming up next, and he's been talking about it a lot to the press, which is the renegotiation of the trade agreement with China. And obviously, China is our dominant adversary in the world geopolitically. It's also our dominant adversary economically. It's the only market that is at all comparable in size to the United States. So it's good that we're, especially with Japan and our other allies in the Pacific, and now with Europe, proceeding on a footing that is good for the United States, because the largest challenge is still ahead. So
part of me wonders why everybody's so focused. I think this can connect to a broader theme, which is something I tweeted about, and I'm not sure if you guys have a thought on this, but so much of discourse in the political discourse in the last month or so has been focused on like Israel and Epstein, especially on the right. And I think about the wins, like actual legitimate wins that the administration has chalked up on the border, the big, beautiful bill, now on trade. We just got Judge Edmund Bovee confirmed. We might talk about that in final thoughts, but we can just keep talking. And like, I don't know how to get everybody. I think part of it is we're all in this content machine where we're trying to, create content and have something to talk about, and talking about how great things are and how much good the administration is genuinely doing is kind of boring. And people also just like need fights because fights raise attention, and so picking fights over smaller issues seems kind of weird. But I don't know what you guys think. Like this is a massive W, and it's the one of a number in a sequence of big wins that are going to have tangibly positive effects for all of us, especially Americans. And people are focused on stuff that doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that with the kind of proportionality problem. It's interesting to me, you've already left off, to my mind, the biggest domestic achievement other than on immigration of the Trump administration, which is to take substantial steps towards totally dismantling federal support for the institutional left, just across the board, whether that's with regard to universities, whether that's with regard to money coming into leftist NGOs, the entire kind of complex of the institutional left that seemed poised, honestly, in 2024 to dominate us probably for the rest of our political lifetime just has crumbled. And it is worth taking a step back, just like with this trade deal and with the real tangible wins that the Trump administration is delivering. It is worth taking a step back and remembering what we thought the future of this country would look like, say, I don't know, mid-year through 2024, and how much has changed just in the first what is it? I think he's closing in on 200 days, or he's just past 200 days. I mean, we're still in the first year of the Trump administration. And it's easy to forget when you notch a W and just move on and complain about something else. But I really do think the speed with which the Trump administration is accomplishing a lot of really, really important things, both domestically and abroad, is worth noting, even if it makes you sound a little boring, or even it makes you sound like a sycophant, right? Because all you can say is that the Trump administration is doing well. Frankly, I've criticized the Trump administration plenty. The Trump won plenty. I had plenty of critiques of Trump won because a lot of his stuff wasn't happening, but now it is. And I find myself often in the position of sounding like a cheerleader and not because I want to be a cheerleader for Trump, but because it's simply true. He's delivering on a lot of the most important promises that he made, and those things are critical to the future of this country. I'm just much more optimistic about where we are.
One other thing I wanted to mention on the trade deal as well is that we've also seen the Trump administration looking at non-tariff barriers to trade, which are almost equally as important. Things like quotas or regulatory barriers. And we had a live event at the Daily Caller with Howard Lutnick last week. And one of the things that he talked about when he was going to Japan to negotiate this deal from a week ago was he heard this rumor that they weren't allowed to basically import McDonald's French fries on a lot of occasions because they would ask for the origin of the specific potato that each French fry came from. And he actually found out in talking to the Japanese officials that that was 100% true. So because they couldn't say that this specific potato picked from this farm in this state or this city is where this slice of French fry came from, then they couldn't get any of the French fries in. And there's so many crazy stories like that I think indicate just how imbalanced our trading relationship with the rest of the world has really been for the past 2-3 decades.
So I think it's worth noting that the reason that the media doesn't want to talk about the EU trade deal is that it's a validator and vindicator of the administration's policy, which is to say, let's leverage America's strengths, namely the fact that we are the world's consumer of last resort. Also, with respect to the EU, of course, we provide a whole slew of other benefits to them, including the security umbrella that allows the EU to be effectively a social welfare basket case, but we effectively underwrite and support its defense. At the end of the day, using our strengths and leveraging those strengths works. It will lead to benefits, including, to Will's point, the development of essential industries in America. And it also ought to be seen as one part of a multi-leg strategy to make America both independent and strong, and to accentuate our strengths. The other aspects of that, of course, are on the tax relief side, which the big, beautiful bill in part addresses. And then I think another underplayed story is the deregulatory side of things. And if you look at the specific details of many of the executive actions out there, and you consider how laser focused OMB is going to be on the deregulatory piece, including, by the way, just not enforcing the asinine regulations that exist and are hugely detrimental. Potentially, we're talking about tens of billions, if not more, in benefit to the American people in the way of getting the administrative state off the neck of the American people. And of course, we'll have to see where economic numbers go, but we've already seen in the early days of the Trump administration substantial, robust economic growth. It's widespread, it's diverse, and minimal inflation, contra all the naysayers, the Cassandras who were claiming that these policies were going to be disastrous. And that's a perfect segue to Inez, who's going to talk a little bit about the Trump administration EPA's posture towards climate-related regulation.
Yeah, really couldn't think of a better segue, really, because I think you're totally right, Ben, to talk about different pieces that go into the strength of the American economy, and how a lot of quote unquote experts or people who are in the chattering class and going on TV shows speaking about the strength or the weakness of the economy are not looking at it that way. And one huge piece of that came through today and this week with EPA Director Lee Zeldin announcing that they are going to relook at and they're going to reopen the question of the endangerment finding on carbon dioxide under the Clean Air Act. So this is a little, legacy, a little piece of Obama's legacy, but it is hugely consequential to the American economy. The estimate is that $54 billion, Ben, you were talking about tens of billions of dollars benefit to America. The estimate is that this sole finding, and I'll get to how it happened in a minute, because I think it's a perfect example of the administrative state doing an end run both around Congress and around the American people and just coming to a leftist conclusion on the basis of bureaucratic might alone. But just this piece, this regulation, is $54 billion a year annually. And since it's been in place since the late 2000s, you just do the math. So every year, $54 billion of the American economy is basically, it's costing us this one regulation. So this is a finding that the EPA did under the Clean Air Act, which is an act that was passed in the 1970s. We had real problems in America. People like to think about like the past as a cleaner place where the streams ran clear and the air was crystal. But that's actually the opposite of what was true. In 1970, America had a real problem both in the waterways and in the air with particulate matter, right? So essentially from pollution from cars, from factories, et cetera. And there was very little structure around how those things were disposed of how much of it was spewed into the air partially. And this is just part of the development of the economy, right? A lot of economies go through this. A lot of countries go through this as they gain more wealth. Things like having clean air. London famously had terrible air, right, in the 19th century. These are things that countries can afford to care about and then start pulling back on sort of unfettered pollution into the air. So this was a bipartisan act that came out of Congress in 1970 and was pretty much supported by both sides. It was implemented by Nixon, just had broad bipartisan support, which was then taken advantage of under the Biden administration, where they decided to do a agreement. They did a settlement with a bunch of leftist climate change activist groups. And that method is something that was extensively used by the Obama administration, by leftist bureaucracy in general, to basically get a regulation while not going through the process that includes public notice and comment, for example, that includes a lot of extensive work answering the public's comments, right? And includes, negative publicity, et cetera, et cetera. So they did an end run not only around the language of the statute, but around that entire process. They put this in place through a settlement with activist groups. And the end result was that instead of just limiting particulate matter, which is the stuff that makes us cough, and is broadly recognized as pollution, they stuck carbon in as something that could be regulated under this act from 1970, so that climate change activists did not have to go to Congress, did not have to go back to the American people and pass a law that would limit carbon. The bureaucrats at EPA would do it themselves by reinterpreting this law. So I just mention all that because I think it's important. It's a classic way that the administrative state has operated. And in this case, it was a huge regulation worth $54 billion a year. So there's a Supreme Court case that will be reconsidered probably in light of this, but the EPA has the right to reverse this finding in itself. So they've begun the process for doing so. They're unlike the original. They're going through a full notice and comment period. There will be input taken from the public, and this is going to be done right administratively, but it has the potential to really take the boot off not only the American energy sector, but the entire American economy, because this regulation has been raising the cost of American energy and slowing down a lot of things with red tape in ways that have really been detrimental and really without the permission of the American people. So I think it's a good little example of the way that the administrative state has operated, and a good example of where the Trump administration is going to light a fire under the economy just with this one regulation, I think. And you can see that it's being duplicated across a bunch of different agencies. So with that, I'll turn it over to the group.
Yeah. So I think this is another underplayed story. Reversing this and you can just think about one of the most annoying things I find in any car is the button that you essentially, or the way that a car automatically comes to a complete stop, like the engine stops when you pull up to a stop at a parking lot and it has to restart. I always found that incredibly annoying, but that's in there because of these greenhouse gas regulations. It's apparently a way to just finesse the miles per gallon thing, even though it clearly feels like it's putting a lot of wear and tear on your car. That's just one example. I mean, the other examples obviously are just the overwhelming favorability towards electric cars, and the way in which it's impossible to get like cheap gas burning trucks. I mean, there's so many ways in which the EPA is regulating the American auto industry into being much more expensive for normal people. So getting rid of this really stupid reg is going to be a wonderful thing.
One of the things I always think about in relation to that, as it pertains to the auto industry too, is the CAFE standards, because pretty much once a year you get some big leftist account on X who decides to opine on the fact that trucks in America are more dangerous than ever because pickup trucks are getting larger every year. And it's usually a combination of two factors. One is not understanding why people use pickup trucks, which is typically to either drive in places where they do need something that's lifted off of the ground or to haul heavy objects, farmers, hunters, etc. But the second is that the main reason those trucks have gotten bigger over time is the CAFE standards, which basically require this proportionality between how much fuel is burned versus how large the vehicle is. So those small baby pickup trucks that we had in the 70s, 80s, 90s are literally not allowed to exist anymore. So you can't have a small pickup truck because the EPA regulated it out of existence. And yet the progressives who opine on these unsafe pickup trucks that are just running over small children left and right, don't seem to make the connection that it's their own policies that have led to this undesirable outcome that they don't like.
Yeah, just one more point, which is totally a like sort of a personal point that just a point of irritation, let's say. There is a real problem with air quality in the entire Northeast right now, a massive problem. It's coming from Canadian wildfires, which once again, the people who are shrieking in the headlines about this being reversed have nothing to say about the fact that Canada is poisoning the entire, I think it's in the Midwest as well. So it's the Midwest and the Northeast with actual particulate matter, which the Clean Air Act is supposed to regulate. That's the purpose of the act that has been used to essentially, prop up the leftist climate change agenda instead of what the act is actually supposed to do and what was broadly bipartisan and popular, which is make sure that we can go outside without breathing crap in the air.
It's just kind of amazing when you step back and think about it that the anti-energy policies are basically anti-human policies at the end of the day. Of course, these effectively serve as regressive taxes. As when you look at the press release around the statements around the reconsideration of this policy, there's talk about the obvious consequences of uncertainty for the auto manufacturers and all the other knock-on economic effects. And then, of course, there's the element of this, which is you have the ideologues and then you have the cynics on the left who are probably in this for a grift and graft. And that includes the NGOs, that includes the consultants, that includes, of course, the entire regulatory regime built around these standards. So you have all these people getting paid off essentially in response to these regulations. And it's a massive diversion and destruction of resources. It's detrimental to the companies. It's detrimental to the economy. It's detrimental to consumers. And a basic economic policy ought to be do no harm. And these policies have done inordinate harm totally unjustifiably, and of course, as a hallmark of the administrative state, violating all constitutional standards, arguably. So I think this is an unalloyed good, a win for the American people, a win for the rule of law, and hopefully something that a future president will think more than twice about if and when there's another Democrat in office. And on that note, and I guess in part a segment that touches a bit on the balance of power and where things are going. I wanted to talk about an issue which I suspect will be probably an evergreen matter in the months ahead, which is on mid-cycle or mid-decade in this case, redistricting. And typically, states will redistrict after the decennial census is conducted. And obviously, this is hugely significant because how the districts are drawn oftentimes will dictate ultimately the balance of power within each of the caucuses within the states, the delegations of the states, and then, of course, between and among the states themselves. And what we've seen in recent weeks is that while Democrats have oftentimes dominated in terms of drawing these insane gerrymandered districts in states where they have control, and many states have purportedly independent commissions or sometimes even judges ultimately who will draw the maps. And that has resulted in a situation where arguably you have Republicans dominating geographically, but not dominating in terms of representation in Congress. Now we've seen that, at very least in Texas, the Texas legislature is working to redistrict mid-decade, and they may redraw the map in such a way. And I think model of it came out today, actually, as we're recording their proposed map. Map could lead to a swing of potentially up to 5 seats to Republicans in the 2026 election. We've also seen, so the balance there is 25 Republicans and 12 Democrats currently in terms of House seats. And it seems like Texas, in part, is responding to the Trump administration's call here to essentially, and this is to all states really, use all elements of power to try and not only maintain, but grow a Republican House majority. Florida is also looking at potentially doing redistricting. Governor DeSantis has said that there's ample justification for it, in no small part because there were errors to the 2020 census, which resulted in blue states keeping or gaining seats, and in many instances, red states losing seats, unjustifiably so, or not gaining them. And that includes Texas and Florida, given the massive influxes of people to those states, and especially Florida. Ohio is another state that is considering redistricting. Its breakdown is 10 Republicans to 5 Democrats. Supposedly, there could be a 2 to 3 seat Republican gain to the extent they go through on the redistricting plans they're talking about. And now we've seen Democrats raising the alarms on this. And Gavin Newsom, for example, in California, where there's a real uphill battle, I think, under the laws of the state to do it, is threatening to redistrict in California to try to draw more Democrat districts. There have been threats, again, potentially very difficult for them to make good on them, out of Maryland, New Jersey, and New York as well, to potentially try and combat what Republicans are going to do. But to me, I think this is a story at the end of the day about, again, leveraging every lever of power that you have, as well as using political power the way Democrats would use political power to the extent they had it. And again, you can look at some of the absurd districts that are drawn around the country in blue jurisdictions. And that is precisely because Democrats want to do everything they possibly can to win. It's notable, by the way, that Eric Holder, Barack Obama's former attorney general, went out and went to focus working with left-wing redistricting groups after he left office, because Democrats know that getting into the technical weeds of trying to ensure that you have every single electoral advantage is the entire game. So again, I question whether Texas would have even done this had Donald Trump not pushed. But whatever the reason, I think this is an optimistic sign that maybe once again, Republicans are showing they have some sense as to what time it is, and they are going to wield power to try and not only maintain, again, a small majority, but actually grow it. This is exactly what Democrats would do were they in power. They have done it when they've been in power. So I think this is a big positive for Republicans. I think it's a good sign of what's to come. Obviously, the counter is going to be, what will the blowback from Democrats look like? Will this, but if you fail in these efforts, what are the consequences? From a practical perspective, what happens when these maps are potentially challenged? Are you going to have the judiciary within these states potentially overreach in an adverse direction? All open questions at this point, but I think these are major potential developments for the balance of power in the House, which obviously has all manner of tertiary and direct positive effects potentially down the road for the country. And of course, then going to the Electoral College and beyond. So with that, turn it over to the group. What do you make of the coming confrontation over redistricting?
Well, I completely agree with you, Ben, that Republicans might as well. They've been accused of being the gerrymandering party for the past 20 years by the Democrats anyway. Even when you look at states like Illinois, that literally has a snake running up the middle of it, or Maryland. I mean, until maybe 2022, it's not as bad as it used to be, but Maryland having similar, long, skinny districts along the western side of the state, just obscene examples of drawing these districts. Maine in after the 2020 census decided to just draw a little bubble around the Capitol so that the first, I believe, the first congressional district that is represented by Jared Golden could be more easily won by Democrats. Then you have some states actually explicitly drawing districts so that they can be majority minority, which is perhaps the most egregious example of this. Like, oh, we don't have enough black districts, so we're just going to mess with the lines a little bit until we can make sure that that happens. Again, with all of that backdrop, and then Republicans somehow still having the label of being the gerrymandering party, like, you might as well. What more blowback could you possibly get? They've already been accusing you of doing it anyway. So use the rules and levers of power that are available to give yourself a better landscape. I mean, right now, basically, the way the districts are drawn, the max majority that Republicans can have in the House is 5, 6, maybe 7 seats if you're being really generous. And if that's really the landscape, such that districts are drawn that way, where Republicans are already operating at a deficit, then I feel like they have to do something to make themselves more competitive.
Yeah, I learned a personal lesson in this in California. It was one of my first votes. There was a very, California, obviously, as Amber noted about Illinois and Maryland, California had very favorable districts to Democrats. So I thought, this is a good proposition. There was something that California has a proposition system, long story. But anyway, they took it out of the hands, allegedly, of politicians who were gerrymandering it and put it in the hands of a, quote, independent body of citizens. And they got worse, right? So the Republican Party recommended that people vote for this, and it got worse. The proposition passed, it got worse. There isn't really a way to take politics out of politics, and I think that that's a theme that's been running through a lot of the actions of both the Trump administration, the Republican Party. This like new era of Republican politics has been that small d democracy is reasserting itself. There are consequences for elections, as we're so constantly reminded by the other side. And there's not really a way to make democratic politics less messy. We have always, gerrymander was, I believe, the whole term came from the name of a congressman in the 19th century, right? So this is a problem that will always be with us as long as there are human beings who are acting as human beings in positions of power. So trying to be neutral or institutional about this issue, I think, is a fool's errand. It should be left to democracy, which is to say messy gerrymandering. And the Republicans are right to participate in it, because if they don't, they'll simply be steamrollered by it.
Yeah, about damn time. Ridiculous that our states, Republican states were being so generous to Democrats and giving Democrats free seats when states weren't returning the favor at all. And, not a single Democrat out there is complaining about Illinois' absurd gerrymander where they've created these, a whopping 3 Republican seats and something like 20 Democrat seats in a state where Republicans got like 45% of the vote. The Democrats have this coming, and the real joke is that they all talk about, well, we really need to retaliate here. It's like, you can't, you already did. That's the entire point. Everybody's like, well, Republicans will really open Pandora's box if they do this. Guys, Pandora's box was open 2 decades ago. It's been open for a long time. Why are we operating with a 2-seat majority in the House when Donald Trump won a dramatic mandate? That's crazy. That's because Democrats have been maxing out on redistricting and gerrymandering while the Republicans haven't. It's about time that we do the same and return the favor. Democrats should feel like unless they win a landslide, they are going to get wrecked. That's the way they should feel, because that's what they try and impose on us.
And point aside, it was sort of at least tangentially alluded to. I suspect that at some point there's going to be a reset from the Supreme Court when it comes to what districts need to look like and how much the Supreme Court is going to intervene in the first place. Already, we've seen the court say that certain aspects of redistricting are non-justiciable for them. But the notion of we need to have a more strongly black district, for example, like the fact that that is part of the jurisprudence that you're going to have the opposite of colorblindness in the process, but you're actually going to have race-specific districts, and also that you're going to reduce constituents to their race rather than their ideology or anything else, seems to conflict, seems to jibe with where the court has gone on affirmative action, on DEI, in a slew of other areas as well. So I think we're probably going to head for a reckoning on that matter. Maybe it won't happen this cycle, maybe it won't happen the next cycle. But I think there's there's something that feels fundamentally wrong about the idea that you actually have, and it's stated matter of factly in some of these opinions, it's not a black enough district. And that's what people are reduced to when we're talking about how these districts are drawn. So we'll say, stay tuned. I'll keep following it. And I'm sure there's going to be a developing matter and a hotly debated matter in the months ahead as these maps come to the fore and are debated and litigated over, etc. And on that note, we'll transition to something totally different, which is Amber talking about the whole fake Sydney Sweeney controversies. Take it away, Amber.
Thank you. Yeah, I figured, everybody else picked really smart political topics, so let's do something sort of fun and cultural. And I do think that this matters for reasons that I'll get into, but this was such a fascinating backlash over an ad for blue jeans. And I'm assuming most of our viewers probably saw this, but the background is that Sydney Sweeney, who is an actress and I guess sort of a model, she's been doing a lot of ad campaigns as of late, basically got in trouble for being white, blonde, and hot. That's really the short of it. But she did a jeans commercial with American Eagle, or a jeans campaign rather. And one of the commercials has her doing this double entendre between jeans, Jeans, and jeans, Genes. And this is actually a callback to a sort of classic Brooke Shields Calvin Klein ad where they did a very similar bit. But in this case, the camera, pans on Sydney Sweeney and she's buttoning up her jeans and she's being very seductive and she's talking about how she has good genes and how good genes get passed down from parents. And then at the end, with sort of a wink and a nod, she says, "My jeans are blue." Cute ad, funny, sort of classic concept. But according to the woke left, this was Nazism. Yes, Nazism. Good Morning America did an entire segment about how this was a Nazi dog whistle. We've had think pieces and TikTok commentary about how Sydney Sweeney and American Eagle had teamed up to intentionally inject white supremacy into the bloodstream of the country through this ad, and all other kinds of crazy nonsense. I mean, on its face, the idea that there was some conspiracy with a clothing company and a random actress to dog whistle white nationalism and white supremacy and like IQ maxing is just bizarre. The fact that they think that they were like in a boardroom dreaming up this sneaky way of doing Nazism is insanity. But also the ad itself doesn't actually suggest any of that. It's just people's brains are completely warped by this inculcation through the universities and mainstream media that everything is racist is just insane. And I think a lot of it is probably they just think whiteness is awful. There's this sort of recurring sentiment from the left that anything to do with white people is in sort of inherently evil, and that there's like a hot white woman modeling jeans is apparently problematic to them. But the beautiful thing about this story and the backlash is that it was basically the opposite of what happened with Bud Light. There was leftist overreach, leftist backlash to a completely stupid fake scandal, and the normal people in America revolted. The jeans sold out. American Eagle stock has skyrocketed by double digits. I think the latest report I saw said 12 to 14% since the ad started, and that was 2 days ago that number came out from Business Insider. And there's no indication that American Eagle plans to pull the ad or apologize. Sydney Sweeney has kept on posting right through it on Instagram. And it just shows how far our culture has shifted. If this had happened 5, maybe even 3 years ago, we probably would have seen a different reaction from the brand, from the actress. And we probably would have seen some people feeling uncomfortable telling the left that they had gone totally insane with their reaction to this. And instead, everyone is rightfully calling them out for being just totally crazy and is actually buying the jeans. Outside of even just the racial undertones of what the left is doing, there's also, I think, the acceptance of the fat phobia movement that has gained ground along the left as well. There was a New York Times long think piece today from two authors talking about how conservatives are co-opting thinness and skinniness and trying to make the left be fat and ugly. And apparently that's like supposed to be a bad thing, that conservatives want people to be thin and healthy and look attractive. And it's just amazing stuff. We've got like fat phobia and racism all wrapped up into one big bucket, and the left throwing this all on this young, thin, hot blonde model who just wants to sell jeans. I'll let the group weigh in on kind of what you think about what this means for perhaps the conservative shift of the culture, or even just like the normalcy shift of the culture after a decade-long experience of the worst woke excesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very conscious choice on the part of the advertisers to play into exactly this cultural dynamic. And I think that's a large part of the reason that they've accomplished what they set out to do, right? This is clearly aesthetically, this is a redux of the 80s and 90s. I don't think this is silly at all, by the way. Some people want to dismiss the connection. I don't think that's true. And I think even more clearly when you look back at the 80s and see how the country felt about itself, and then the sort of self-confident music, fashion, the entire vibe, and yes, the kind of advertisements that we're playing on TV. I think those things are connected. They're not, push a political button, out comes an aesthetic, but I do think those things are intimately connected. And so I think this is an indicator that aesthetically we're going in a different direction than we have for the last, I would say, 20 years. And I think that's probably reflective of the mood of the country politically, among other things. That being said, I really do think Sydney Sweeney is going to constantly pop up as a sort of crypto rightist, not because of any of her views, but because of some of the things that Amber said. Because the left can't help but hate the emblem of a kind of classic Americana, blonde, white, big boob, sexy woman. I also think it's because she very consciously plays into, like, she's very obviously wants to be ogled, and it's okay with her, which I think there actually aren't a lot of actresses or models today. It always has to be sort of dissembled. Of course, all people in this industry are chasing, to some extent, right, the female gaze, the male gaze. But I think the fact that she's sort of cheerful and okay with it is something that people are really responding to, that men are really responding to, above and beyond just the fact that she's hot and has big boobs. I think like the fact that she seems cheerful about it and she is happy with the attention that she's getting from men. She's obviously okay with it. She's not criticizing it. I could think of a counterpoint in Emily Ratajkowski, who is constantly intellectualizing and critiquing the attention she gets because she's a beautiful, sexy woman. Sydney Sweeney is the opposite. And I think that is something that is appealing after so many years of sort of Me Too discourse. So I do actually think there's, quote unquote, a discourse around this, that there is some validity to the discourse, even if I think the advertising execs in this case totally are doing this in a self-conscious way. I only have one critique of this ad, which is that all of that sex appeal went into a pair of very baggy Gen Z jeans.
I'm so glad you said that.
Are not very there's sort of like a conflict with the sort of mid 80s, 90s sex appeal of the ad and these extremely baggy jeans. But apparently this fall, we're going back to skinny jeans. So millennials victorious once again.
God bless.
This topic is way beyond my ken, so I'll only make a couple observations here.
I want to hear Ben's takes on skinny jeans versus baggy Gen Z jeans.
This is what we're here for on NatCon Squad. Let me say this. I do agree, by the way, they are kind of ugly jeans. That said, this was brilliant marketing, first and foremost. And I do wonder if they knew that this was going to cause a backlash from the left, or if they were really kind of unaware of it. But I think that has only had a Barbra Streisand effect here. and it's probably only going to juice sales. And I bet we're going to see copycat attempts by other brands probably in the days, weeks, and months ahead to try and replicate this to the extent you can. If they did know that the left would react as the left has, I think that that is kind of notable because in the past, brands would have been afraid that the mob would have come for them and they would have been destroyed. But it doesn't seem like there's any sort of fear right now or backing down. And I think that is a positive signal, a bullish signal for where the culture is. And then the last point, and this is just kind of, I think, reiterating what's already been said, is that we were living in a world that the left has made, which said that ugly is beautiful and basically rejecting all the things that human nature tells us is the most virtuous and good. And if there's a return to genuinely positive, celebrating beauty and aesthetics, that's a good thing in America, not celebrating ugliness and trying to tear down all the things that are fundamental and innate to human nature. I think that's all positive to the extent we can draw that out from this one anecdote, and the jury's out on that.
Yeah, I think this is a big W. I mean, the fact that you can just see the left screeching, like they understand something's changing here. There's a vibe shift. I think also a good example of this that a lot of people have pointed out was the Scotty Scheffler ad after he won British Open. You have this like very wholesome ad from Nike coming out with him and his son being like, "You've already won." It's like it's a return to kind of very traditional modes of advertising where they're just advertising normal and like successful people rather than the dysfunctional. And that's also, and I think it's just going to continue to do well because it's what people like fundamentally. Like, it's not even that it's necessarily about making a political statement. It's just a return to anti-politics where you're just going with, well, what actually sells? What do people want? What will lead them to buy our product? And if it happens to be anti-woke, so be it. And it's a good sign that I bet a lot of advertising woke peak kids are really upset about this and suddenly getting fired if they aren't willing to go along with a plan. Like you have to also think about what's going on inside these agencies and inside these companies where, they listened to their woke idiot young hires who led them down the garden path. And all of a sudden they're like, yeah, actually, why don't we do the thing we used to do where we just had hot women sell products? That seems to work better. So I mean, I think, we aren't wrong to talk about it. It's a big moment in the culture and it's good to see.
And I think to the extent the woke position themselves in opposition to Sydney Sweeney, that's just a losing message that's only going to further discredit them for years to come. So all to the good on that note as well. And with that, we'll turn to final thoughts, and I'll start off with positive development that occurred. Well, one positive development and one negative development to balance it out, because I have to be a little bit pessimistic here today. The positive is that today it was announced that via the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Treasury Department as well, that the U.S. government has sanctioned Alexandre de Moraes. He is the Brazilian Supreme Court justice who has basically acted like a dictator in trying to censor and silence Brazilians, gone after American social media companies, and fought famously against Elon Musk, tried to seize assets from him. This is the ultimate anti-free speech authoritarian who has usurped insane amounts of power. And so the fact that the Trump administration, consistent with what they've threatened, is now following through on the threat to actually punish foreign leaders who would dare to try to violate our rights. I think that's a very good thing, a very positive thing. Marco Rubio in a tweet said in part, quote, "Let this be a warning to those who would trample on the fundamental rights of their countrymen. Judicial robes cannot protect you." This comes on the heels, by the way, of some recent disclosures from the House Judiciary Committee, which has been investigating attempts from foreign governments, including from the EU, to engage in backdoor censorship activities against American-owned social media companies. Well worth checking out the interim report, I believe, that the Judiciary Committee put out. It's insane, the anti-speech rules and regulations that the EU is implementing. And we're starting to see through document production just how insane their demands are on U.S. firms, social media firms, with, of course, collateral damage potentially to our speech, to the extent the companies end up bending under the weight of potentially billions of dollars worth of penalties that could be coming their ways. On the negative but almost comical side, it came out as we're recording that there will be no change to interest rates from the Fed. This war between the Fed and Donald Trump is going to be it's going to be fascinating to see ultimately where this goes in terms of the Fed as an institution. Another battle between, in this case, I guess, a quasi-independent public-private body in a very ambiguous area, and what power and what oversight exists from the executive branch vis-a-vis the Fed. And this, once again, looks like another politicized act by the Fed chairman when you consider his resistance to Trump, and by contrast, seemingly trying to juice the economy for Joe Biden on the way out. So we'll see where that goes ultimately. Probably a net negative for the economy, but it could mean ultimately that the Fed, which in some ways is sort of like the ultimate deep state creature, itself might come under threat, its so-called independence, and that might ultimately be a good thing ultimately.
Yeah, Ben, a lot of the cases that are winding their way through the courts about other agencies, the Fed is looming. The independence of the Fed is sort of looming over all of those cases and different agencies and different structures. So it's a good thing to keep an eye on. My final thought is you may have heard that the Department of Justice has filed a misconduct complaint against District Court Judge James Bozeman. You might remember his name because he was the guy who put in the demand. Bozeberg. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't even just had it in front of me. No, but you might remember his name from being the guy that turned the planes or put in the order to turn the planes around that had already left the tarmac from the Trump administration. But this is a really great story reported by Margot Cleveland over at the Federalist. There was a judicial conference where Judge Bozeman allegedly well, not allegedly, it's in the notes of the memo that was published by Margot Cleveland, said it voiced a bunch of worries about the Trump administration creating a constitutional crisis, not listening to judges. Now, it's not against the rules for judges to criticize the president, but in this case, the president is the defendant in a whole bunch of cases going through the federal judiciary. And so those comments were wildly inappropriate. And potentially a misconduct complaint. So the Department of Justice is filing that misconduct complaint. It's going to go before a body that is made up of his fellow judges. They're going to determine whether or not there's a misconduct. There is misconduct there. Ultimately, I think this is a good idea, but ultimately the sanction against judges is either going to be, as Ben keeps repeating every week, is going to be some kind of congressional reorganization of lower courts' power or impeachment of individual judges. Nevertheless, because this is going to be a review of peers, right? Ultimately, that's the only sanction here. I don't know what kind of chances, maybe Will has a better idea than I do, but what kind of chances this has of succeeding in that kind of environment. That being said, I do think it's a good shot across the bow for the Trump administration to actually, take an action against a judge who has shown bias against the Trump administration writ large. So there are you can have your political opinions as a judge, but when you show bias against a defendant in a whole series of cases over which you have power, that is a problem. So in any case, I'm going to keep an eye on this, and I'll let you guys know where it goes.
My final thoughts are, go ahead, Will.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to go because she asked me
yes, of course.
that question about the success. I think this has more of a chance of success than people realize. The DC Circuit is going to care about its overall integrity. It's worried about a lot of things. So, we've had successful judicial complaints even in liberal circuits as the Article 3 project. So these things can work. My final thought is Emil Bove got confirmed yesterday night to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. This is a big deal because the Democrats made an enormous effort to stop his confirmation, including a lot of the same tricks from the Kavanaugh playbook, whistleblowers, last-minute revelations, you name it. And the GOP Senate said, LOL, we don't care. We're confirming him anyway, which was the right move. He's a great guy. And he's, a really, really excellent candidate. He's rock-ribbed. My boss on the Article 3 side, Mike Davis, has said he wants him on the Supreme Court shortlist. I think that'd be a great idea. He'd be a hell of a Supreme Court justice, too. But good day for the good guys. And a lot of conservative legal movement types who are no longer actually conservative are very upset about this yet another indicator that it's a good pick for the court.
Two quick things from me. One is there was this viral video of a Cincinnati mob that beat up two people. It was basically a mob of black people, and then they beat up a white man, and then subsequently a white woman who tried to step in was knocked out by one of the members of the mob as the onlookers sort of cheered and filmed and I guess thought it was funny. But outside of this mob situation, which sadly has become all too common in America, there's a female police chief who was apparently looking into this and just reiterated my hatred for female cops because she went out and said that people who were sharing the video were to blame for the reaction because they were missing important context about what happened. And it's like, it doesn't matter what context led to literally 15 people to beat up one person and repeatedly stomp on their head trying to murder them, and then assault and knock out a female bystander who was trying to protect this man. It's just disgusting that she would even deign to say that. And it turns out, by the way, that she's also being sued for apparent racial hiring discrimination in her department. So probably the least credible person to accuse anybody else of sharing things without context because it makes a certain group of people look bad. And then my other quick final thoughts are on the Atlantic profile of Jasmine Crockett, heard around the world. This is the apparent rising star of the Democratic Party. Everyone's going on and on about her talent for being on camera and creating viral moments, even if those are largely negative in their reaction. But this profile, which I assume going into was meant to be some sort of puff piece, turned out quite the opposite for her because some of the hidden details are quite bad for how she looks publicly. One of which is that she has a selfie of her own self as her phone lock screen. The second apparent narcissistic trait of Jasmine Crockett is that she thought that she was the most qualified Democrat to be the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, not because of unique qualifications, but because she has the largest social media following, because that's how committee chairs should be chosen. And she was apparently shocked when her fellow Democrats did not vote for her. And then finally, when the reporters started calling around to other Democrats in the House and their staff members, apparently none of whom wanted to comment about her on the record because they knew that this was a lose-lose game, right? You either praise Jasmine Crockett on the record and you're connected to every idiotic thing she says in public, or you decline or speak on background about how you think that she's actually bad for the party and you're ending up potentially dividing your base. And apparently she has loyal fans that you don't want to anger either. So as Jasmine Crockett got wind of the fact that this reporter was calling around, she actually called the reporter herself and said that the profile was finished and that she was, quote, revoking all permissions, because apparently that's how media works. Once you talk to a reporter on the record and the reporter does their basic due diligence for the profile, you can just shut the whole thing down. It was just a hilarious display of narcissism and just the idiocy of this person that Democrats are so scared to speak out against, and she's quickly becoming the face of the party, much to their detriment. So it was just, I highly recommend everyone read the full profile because even outside of those three little things that I picked out, the whole thing is just really instructive about who this person is and what it says about the Democrats that they're willing to allow her to become their star because they're so scared of criticizing her. And we actually got some emails about subsequent articles we wrote about it from people complaining that we were committing microaggressions against her. So this is the kind of thing that is apparently happening on the left. It doesn't bode well for the future, that's for sure.
So I think the takeaway today is that we need more Sydney Sweeney and we need more Jasmine Crockett. That is what will make America greater again in the future. With that, on behalf of Will, Amber, and Inez, thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Weingarten, and we'll see you at the next NatCon Squad.